Hi, I'm Joe Halco, Director of Community Relations for Northwestern Counseling and Support Services, and welcome to another episode of NCSS Here for You. Since 1958, Northwestern Counseling and Support Services has provided access to high-quality services which promote healthy living and emotional well-being to the residents of Franklin and Grand Isle counties. Over the years, as the needs of the community have changed, so too have the programs and services that we make available to assist children, adolescents, adults, families, and seniors. We take our role in the community seriously and strive to provide a continuum of the highest quality services to meet the needs of individuals who at any point are struggling and seek assistance. This month's episode is titled Teen Mental Health Struggles. The month of May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and this show serves as part of our initiative to raise awareness about the importance of balancing mental health in conjunction with physical health to achieve well-being. Did you know that 1 in 5 people in Franklin and Grand Isle counties experience a mental health challenge each year? Did you also realize the significant increase in substance abuse in our 2-county area? Anxiety, depression, suicide, and self-injury are also prevalent mental health disorders for teens and adults alike. Although stigma remains a barrier for many to seek treatment, those who do can achieve satisfying results that change their lives. Today on the show, my special guest is Alexina Federhen, Miss Vermont 2022, whose platform focuses on teen mental health with her social impact initiative of Speak Out, Reach Out, supporting mental health awareness. We'll learn about the journey that Alexina has taken in overcoming depression and anxiety. Alexina's involvement with organizations such as NAMI Vermont has found her speaking on the importance of mental health in schools and communities throughout Vermont. To discuss her journey and the amazing impact that she's had on Vermont teens, I'm pleased to introduce this month's guest, Alexina Federhen, Miss Vermont 2022.
Hello.
So, Alexina, welcome to the program. And, I have found out that this is actually your last official duty as Miss Vermont 2022.
Because you're correct.
So I and we are honored that you are here today and that you took the time to be here with us in Franklin County.
Oh my goodness, it's my pleasure. I feel like this is the perfect way to kind of round out my year. We'll talk a lot about this, but I think one of the biggest things of my goal this year as Miss Vermont was to make people feel like they mattered. I started in this organization competing because I met Miss Vermont as like a little girl who was bullied, ostracized, and I felt seen for the first time in my life by someone who I idolized. A princess, a real life princess. And so being able to be that princess and show kids that they matter, their voices are heard, and if they don't feel like that, maybe they feel like Miss Vermont heard them and saw them and told them the little secret that you don't need a crown to be a queen, because it's all about what's in your heart. And I know that sounds cheesy, but it's been a really wonderful year, and mental health is a huge part of that.
Well, speaking of that, so as Miss Vermont, and again, your platform, which has focused on teen mental health, but, as the year has unfolded for you, what has surprised you the most as you've traveled throughout the state?
I think the biggest thing, I've gone to so many high schools, middle schools, elementary schools, talked to kids, teens, young adults, parents, and a lot of the things that I thought, trying to adapt my experience, I won't age myself too much, like a few years ago when I was struggling with mental health, and sometimes I still do, but as a teen in high school, my high school looks completely different, and my school looks completely different than the schools we have today. There's so many more struggles and barriers and boundaries, but when going into those schools, I was assuming that some of those stigmas will be broken down, because I think I've seen that in my sector, but I think you have to realize when you get yourself in a bubble of, I talk about mental health. I'm the mental health girly in all my friend groups. My, social media is directed a lot toward mental health accounts. So I see it a lot. And when going into the schools, I think one of the biggest things that surprised me is how much more work needs to be done. I think we've seen a lot of more teens and young adults talking about mental health, but there are these barriers of either parents not being supportive or not knowing how to be supportive. Local and lack of access to resources have been a huge barrier. I've had parents come up to me and say, we are on an 8-month waiting list. One family actually moved out of state to find healthcare for their teen who is struggling with depression and anxiety. And I would have liked to have thought some of these barriers wouldn't still be here, but they definitely are present. They're just new types of barriers. And so going in and talking and breaking down some of those barriers by sharing my lived experience, I think helps break down them, as well as show teens that you can be successful in so many aspects of your life and still struggle mentally, and that asking for help isn't a sign of weakness. In fact, it's really, really brave. So those are some of the challenging things that I've seen, and makes me even more determined to continue my work even after Miss Vermont, because I know how much everyone needs it right now. I mean, we're all going through a lot of stress and anxiety after the pandemic. We saw a 20% increase in mental health struggles of students, especially. Not to mention all of us adults, losing jobs, having struggles and access to healthcare when you lose that job. And so it makes it even more relevant to keep talking about mental health, to keep sharing resources, and sharing avenues of ways to get better to everybody, but especially students.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Let's talk about your lived experiences with mental health challenges.
Yeah, so I think for me, when looking back at my life, I think it really did start in elementary school. I grew up in a single parent home, low income, and I was on the edge of one of the better school districts. And I was put into a class with, people who I thought were great, and then realized very quickly that my low income status and my single parent status meant I wasn't on the list of some of these kids' friend groups that their parents made. I wasn't invited to birthday parties of a group of like 6 girls. And when all of them start talking about it and you're the only one not invited, it really hurts. And from a young age, I developed and realized that I had a reading disability, which affected, popcorn, going around class reading out loud was, I think, my most feared activity in school, and something that I, as a young kid, would get anxiety about. And I realized from a really young age that if I isolated myself first, people couldn't do it to me. And so that's one of those learned patterns of isolating yourselves, taking yourself away from social situations, which makes, sense as far as survival, but creates these boundaries and kind of mechanisms of a boiling pot of anxiety and depression. And without anyone to kind of explain to me what I was starting to feel changes in my emotions. I remember being in middle school, which I was excited to go to because it was a group of new students, but some of those same barriers of exclusion just followed me. Rumors spread like wildfires that, I was poor and I shopped at Goodwill, and like, jokes on them, because now thrift shopping is really cool. But I started noticing like having panic attacks with no reason. And it happened more and more frequent, and I felt like totally responsible for those, quote, negative feelings that I had happen throughout the day with, barely any connection of why that was happening. And so I blame myself for a lot of years. I struggled with self-harm in middle school, but no one knew because, we're really good at hiding things. We're really good at putting on a good face. And so in high school, I focus my efforts instead of on friends, which, I was still a very friendly person. I'm sure people thought I was really popular in my own friend group. And I didn't hang out with people after school. I was like, I'm going to put my focus into learning. So that was my outlet. And I held myself to such a high standard of perfection in school, perfection in after school activities, that it just started dwindling away anything left that I had to support myself emotionally or physically. And I was taken to my pediatrician at, I think it was junior year of high school for the first time, and was diagnosed with depression and anxiety. And that for me, I was humiliated. I felt like although someone saw something that was going wrong, I didn't want to be categorized as someone who was crazy. And that's what I associated with at a young age. I was really afraid to taking medication because I felt like that was another opportunity to say, look, I do have problems. Look, there is something wrong with me. And it really took until a breaking point in my sophomore year of college where I tried to take my life to really give me a wake-up call. Not only literally, but also if I wanted to get better, I had to start trying and doing things that I would roll my eyes at, like going to a therapist for the first time and trying to work with a nutritionist. So for 1 year after that experience, I tried everything. And I realized when compounding all of these really simple ways of taking care of your body, I was starting to feel better. And that's not to say that I don't still struggle with depression or anxiety, but I have tools and resources and know myself to know when I need to reach out for them, and to also know that it's okay to reach out for them. And so I started being so passionate about mental health because had I heard someone talked about their experience with depression or anxiety or mental health in general at a young age, I think I would have realized that it's okay not to be okay. And we all go through so much stress, especially as students, that it's pretty remarkable that we aren't all, struggling, which in some facets I think we are. I always say, like, stress is a constant in life. Not to fear that, but to realize that you can have tools and coping mechanisms to combat that, but you have to commit to learning them, just like we do committing to learning to take care of our bodies, eating the right foods. It's the same thing with mental health, but it just sometimes gets brushed to the side and not as focused on.
Yeah, that's for sure. So let's talk about what types of formal or informal supports that were helpful to you when you were trying to overcome your struggles with bullying and self-esteem at a younger age.
Yeah, it's hard because I think a lot of facets of either formal or informal help depend on that person wanting and admitting that that they want to try, that they want to feel better, or that there might be something wrong. And for me, I realized that, what helped is one, accepting help was okay, for one. Asking for help was okay. When I was in middle school and high school, I think the best thing for me was to focus on something else. I just had wished I didn't hold myself to such a high standard and realize that, like, failure is part of life. Yeah. I've learned probably the most valuable lessons failing. As a business owner, I fail a lot. Trying new things, working with a new client, figuring out all of these avenues that cause failure, but it's what you do with that obstacle that really defines. And I think giving teens coping mechanisms and tools to be able to say, when I'm feeling stress, how do I treat myself like a friend to be able to feel better? Because I think we're a lot nicer to other people than we are to ourselves. And having those tools and resources, I think it would have been really transformative. But at the same time, they might have been offered to me, but I just wasn't ready to accept them because I had so much stigma around mental health, around depression, and what that meant, and if that changed who I was or what I was capable of. And so I think what we talk about of stigma is such a huge problem because until you're ready to accept, help in whatever standpoint that is, it's probably not going to make as big of a difference as it would if you're like, okay, I'm ready to put in the work, to put in the time. And I think it would have taken a lot of less effort over a longer period of time rather than, oh, shoot, I really have to commit to this for 1 year solidly to figure out what tools I need to learn to be able to be successful while still struggling.
Yeah, that's well said. What do you see as the impact of social media on youth and their mental wellness?
Yeah, I sound old when I go into schools now because I'm like, when I was your age, which, like, I had social media. I remember being bullied on Facebook, which now Facebook is like an old person thing I hear. But social media can be great, right? It can give us access and tools. For me as an adult, I realized that I struggled with dermatillomania, which is a skin picking disorder that I had for my whole entire life, but always thought it was a nervous habit. And so social media can be a great way to be like, oh my goodness, that's me. She's describing all of the things that I go through on a daily basis. And I finally have someone to either look up to, have a name to be able to Google to look for help, or at least realize that I'm not alone in what I'm going through. And I think for teens, it can access as a resource. But at the same time, depending on the algorithm, you might be fed things that are going to perpetuate mental health struggles. The Photoshop, the filters, all of these things that I think, one, make us have a higher standard for what we're able to accomplish because look at what this person's doing. And I actually created a social media account. I think my social media account has always been pretty honest. But I created one specifically to go along with my book, The Feel Better Way, to use it as a tool to share the things that we don't hear about on social media. Mental breakdowns, like mental health breakdowns. What does it look like? What do I look like at my worst? And how do I perceive and how do people see me on an everyday basis? Completely different. Social media has that tool because it's what we choose to post, and most people are going to post the good things. They're not going to be like, here's me crying into my pillow, which happens, but we don't see it, so we don't normalize it. So I think it's about starting to think about yourself, everyone, as a way to show social media in a true aspect starts helping break down those barriers of perfectionism and all of these unattainable standards that make us feel even worse about ourselves. And on the second end of this, on the scale, is realizing, telling teens, like, what you see on the internet is not real. Like, some of it might be kind of real, but there are probably pieces that are left out to make it seem even more attractive or perfect. And so I think it's a double-edged sword when it comes to social media.
Yeah, for sure. It's a tough one, and it really is, and it just seems to get exacerbated each year. So let's talk about, do you still see stigma getting in the way of parents talking to youth relative to the seriousness of mental health?
Absolutely. I mean, I talk to teens both as a NAMI speaker and traveling to different schools around my own nonprofit, talking about mental health, taking care of our minds. And a lot of times we talk about barriers as students, like, what in this fictitious person might this person not reach out for help? And a lot of the answers come down to stigma, fear of being judged. And that's not just by their peers, that's by their parents. I've had people come up to me and say, you know, I'm really happy that you said something because my family doesn't believe in mental health. They think it's all up here and that it's not real. And for you to say that mental health has physical effects on our bodies, can affect us in so many more ways than just what goes through our mind, really helped me. And so I see a lot of times too, kids being afraid to ask for help because they don't want their parents to know, for whatever that reason is. Either they don't feel safe, they don't feel like they'll be validated or believed, or their home is just not a comfortable or safe environment for them to be that vulnerable. And so I think it's really about, unfortunately, the school systems coming in to add more counselors, which is, you know, really difficult. I mean, we're already seeing a decrease in the number of teachers that we have. It's hard keeping them, and being able to provide more support is needed, but how do we get that support is a whole another question. And I think being able to realize that schools are now not just meant for learning like math, science, and like the basics of health class. Like, they need to have that element of social and emotional support and someone to confide in who will keep it between them, as well as connect them with resources that may not have to go through their parents. I mean, there are tons of resources online of free help that does not connect to your insurance, that is just there for you to be able to talk to someone. I always encourage people to look online, and there's this one resource that I always throw out. It's 741-741, and you can text that number. You can text TALK or Vermont, and that actually connects you with someone whose job it is to be able to help you figure out, okay, what's the next step? You know, I know that I'm struggling, or I think I might be, but I have these 3 barriers that make it impossible. It might be parents. And how do I get around that? And so that's a resource that I throw out because it can be really helpful and empowering knowing that there are other avenues to get help.
And, you know, one of the things about that as well is, especially for young people, the ability to know that they don't have to sit in front of someone, that they can text. And as long as they understand that, like you said, the people on the other end are professionals, and it's not just somebody kind of sitting there throwing out their own, their own concepts, that is actually a very engaging process for a lot of young people. So that is a great that you mentioned that. So you spoke of your book earlier, but let's talk about what you learned while you were writing the book, The Feel Better Way.
So that book was actually a project in one of my classes in studios for my Master's of Fine Arts that I took way too seriously. And it was kind of a open-ended problem solution kind of project that we had. And I was like, not only did I see mental health struggles in my own school, I think one of the installations that we had were confessions. And one of the confessions of students within our own very small cohort was, you know, I've thought about suicide and I wonder if people would care. And for me, that really hit my heart in the sense that design has the power to have so much influence and so much connection to be able to help connect people to resources, help share stories to make them realize they're not alone in what they're going through. And so I remember when I was a teen, and I remember being in the nurse's office and seeing pamphlets of like someone who like looked really sad with like a cloud over their head. And I was like, I can't relate to those people. And one, I didn't want to admit that felt like me at times. And two, kind of a misnomer that people who struggle with depression and anxiety are sad. Sometimes people with the biggest smiles are struggling the most. And so I wanted to create not a pamphlet that either had clinical language or had images of people that didn't look like the people who were reading them. And also use tools and language of how I would want to be like chatted with and not just talked at. And include them on the dialogue. So the book started as me trying to organize my thoughts as like, okay, if this is a chapter by chapter, how do we organize it in a way of like, here are some warning signs. What is mental health? Who does it affect? What is depression? What is anxiety? What can it look like? What can it also look like? And so I worked with mental health professionals to create that book and ensure that the information I had was accurate. And I created it specifically for the state of Vermont because that's where I grew up. That's where I struggled. And having a book that doesn't look like a pamphlet, that just looks like a really cool book with like the Feel Better Way on it, it's a pretty good logo if I do say myself, can be like that break and barrier of not like, oh, what's this pamphlet you have? Like, it's just a book. And instead of having images of people who may not identify or look like you, I used illustrations of like little doodles to show emotion because it felt like, okay, I'm not seeing someone who I either can't identify with as someone who is Latina and grew up in Vermont. I mean, pretty much the only one in my area. And I'm reminded of that. Oh, where are you from? You look so exotic. And, you know, I wanted someone who looked like me to admit that they struggled, whatever that facet of look like meant. And so that book became like my life for a really long time, for a few months until I was ready to start reaching out to organizations to see if people wanted to sponsor the book. And thanks to NAMI Vermont, we were able to distribute hundreds of copies of that book all around the state of Vermont. And so there are kids right now who are, I told them, I'm like, feel free to doodle along in the book, like use it as your resource. If you want to write notes, if you want to write little affirmations, like go ahead, this is your book. And I really hope that something in there either makes them realize that they're not alone or encourages them that there's help and there's hope and it gets better, as much as it may feel like it won't and it feel like you're the only one going through this. Although your experiences are unique, I mean, like you said, 1 out of 5 individuals struggle with mental health condition every given year, and it's probably underreported. There are probably a lot more people, and to let them know that they're not alone. So that book is my baby, and I am so happy and proud that it was so well received. And if you'd like to go buy the book, go to www.feelbetterway.com. I don't know which camera to look at, but
Now, earlier this month, 2 resolutions that were part of the extended efforts from Mental Health Advocacy Day were developed and coordinated by yourself, along with Vermont Care Partners, the Vermont Association of Mental Health and Addiction Recovery, and NAMI Vermont, which resulted in the General Assembly recognizing the importance of mental health awareness in Vermont, and that April the 4th was designated as Youth and Young Adult Mental Health Day in the state of Vermont. Now, this is another example of your efforts to destigmatize mental health. How did you find the process in raising awareness about mental health to have this happen? Because this is a big deal.
Yeah, thank you. I guess to start off answering your question, at first it wasn't easy. I was told by many people that it couldn't be done and that it just wasn't the right time. I think I've had a lot of barriers of people either not believing that it is possible and 2, thinking that it's important. And when I started on this journey, I just reached out to anyone I could find through the internet. I reached out to Lori, who is the president of NAMI Vermont, and I just reached out to everyone I could find. And I said, here's my mission. Can I work with you? How can we work together? And also, do you know anyone within the legislative community that could help me with this bill? I'm really wanting to push this and focus on teen mental health because when I think about mental health, it affects everybody. But focusing on the fact that teens have way more struggles than they ever have before, feeling safe in their environment, feeling safe to identify as who they are. There are so many more barriers that they face, as well as they are the future. I mean, it's corny, but like they are the people who are going to help, make this world what it will be in the future. And if we don't support and invest in them, how do we expect them to succeed in an environment where they were never meant to succeed? And so shedding the light on how not only important it is, how vast and how many students take their lives every year, how many students struggle and don't get help, I think is just really, really important. And so on my quest of just cold calling, cold emailing, and trying to find people, I realized that although it took work, it took a lot of emailing back and forth, a lot of Zoom calls to try to show that like I am serious about this and I really want to invest and collaborate with people who think this is important. I found my people. I found the people who thought it was important, who knew that it was important not just in general, but to do it now. And so I was really, I guess, warmed by that reciprocation of interest in creating a bill or a resolution like this. Thank you. And now being able to see April 4th as Teen Mental Health Day for youth of Vermont is just so powerful. I'm so proud to have been even a small part of that. But I think what it really shows is how many people are invested in our youth. And I think that makes them feel good, as well as showing schools like within that day where are people that we can get to come talk to our students about mental health. NAMI is a great resource, and I think sharing those resources, I mean, a lot of times I go to schools like, we had no idea that this was a thing, that we could request people to come and talk about mental health to our students. And so that just opens that door, which opens another door, and it creates a domino effect of change for the better, and to connect students to resources and share lived experiences to make them feel less alone. And that's the goal, right? And if we all keep doing it and we all keep being loud and being proud to talk about mental health and encouraging students to reach out for help, I think that's how we make great change. And I've just really been, I think that resolution has also been a really great chapter end to my year as Miss Vermont, to just kind of combine all of my efforts into one piece that will be part of history. I mean, that's pretty darn cool.
Sure it is.
So it's just been a blast, and I'm so thankful for everyone who saw something in this resolution and wanted to make it happen just as much as I did.
Yeah, well, like I said, that's a tremendous accomplishment. And, you know, Mental Health Awareness Month is always a month that, once again, the messaging gets a lot louder and a lot greater, but, you know, the important thing is that we need to get people to be able to sit around a table like you and I are right now, 365 days a year, and not be afraid to talk about mental health circumstances. And if somebody is struggling, or if they've overcome some challenges, and how neat that is and how they did it. And I mean, I have yet to know of anyone who's a diabetic who won't talk about it, you know, like, oh, I can't talk about that. But, you know, the physical health aspects people will talk about. The mental health aspects, you know, we get that stigmatization that is involved. So a lot of the work that you have been doing over the past year certainly has been absolutely incredible. You've been able to shine a light on not just mental health as a whole, but teen mental health and the importance of getting to young people, because as we all know, by the age of 14, a lot of individuals will already be struggling with some sort of a mental health disorder, and they need to hopefully have those addressed sooner rather than later. One of the concerns that I see is, you know, people wait up to 10 years before they seek treatment. It's a long time.
Right. Another piece that I think maybe we'll conclude with is that you don't have to be in crisis to have access and to receive mental health resources. I think that's
Absolutely.
a misnomer. I've even been turned away from resources because I wasn't high enough on the list of need. And I think, unfortunately, our healthcare system still has a lot of work to do to be able to create more resources for people in general with mental health struggles. Yeah. But I encourage everyone out there, if you're struggling with a mental health condition, advocate for yourself. Someone saying no, or someone saying we don't have an appointment for another 5 months, call someone else. Like, reach out to another resource. There are resources available, but just realize you have to advocate for yourself, and that does not mean you have to wait until you're in crisis to reach out for help.
Absolutely. How well said, and what a way to wrap up the show. Alexina, I can't thank you enough for being here. This has been a great way to be a part of your final official duty, and congratulations on the past year.
Thank you so much.
So I want to thank my guest, Alexina Federhen, for being on the show today and sharing her insights on the importance of destigmatizing mental health and encouraging teens to speak up when they're not all right. I also want to thank you, the viewer, for spending time with us again this month. You can learn more about all of our NCSS programs and services by logging on to ncssinc.org. I'm Joe Helko, and I'll be back next month with another episode of NCSS Here for You.